All right, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing cases in American history,
Okay.
the story of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown.
Yeah, this one's going to be a tough one.
It is. We're using excerpts from his Wikipedia page to guide us, and let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
No, I bet.
I mean, you've probably heard the basics, right?
Sure. Killer clown, lots of victims.
Yeah, but we're going beyond the headlines, trying to understand how this guy could live a seemingly normal life
Right.
as a contractor, active in his community, and then be this brutal serial killer.
It is really hard to wrap your head around that. The contrast is just unbelievable.
Seriously. And that photo of him with Rosalind Carter,
Oh, yeah. That's just creepy.
it's unsettling, makes you wonder, how did someone like that fly under the radar for so long?
And that's exactly what makes this deep dive so interesting, right?
Totally.
We're not just looking at the gruesome facts, we're digging into the psychology of it all.
The why?
The why, the societal factors, trying to see the whole picture.
Exactly. We've got to consider everything.
Everything.
Like his messed up childhood, the failures of the system that let him operate for so long.
Yeah.
And, of course, we'll try to figure out what drove him to do it.
Yeah, the big question. Though with a guy like Gacy, I don't know if we'll ever really know.
Probably not. Speaking of his childhood, that's where we'll start. His relationship with his dad was a nightmare.
From what I read, his father was an alcoholic. Abusive, both physically and verbally. Just awful.
Yeah, the Wikipedia entry mentions his dad constantly putting him down, comparing him to his sisters.
And that kind of early trauma can have a huge impact, you know?
Oh, that's a
It
little...
can mess you up for life. Studies show that kids who experience that kind of abuse are at a much higher risk for all sorts of issues later on. Aggression, antisocial behavior,
Makes sense.
even sociopathic tendencies.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
There's even a story about his dad beating him when he was just 4 years old
Oh, gosh.
for accidentally messing up some car parts.
That's terrible.
It makes you wonder if those early experiences with violence,
Yeah.
if they planted the seeds for his own violent behavior later on.
It's certainly possible. I mean, it's not a guarantee, obviously. Abuse doesn't predetermine your future,
Right.
but it can warp your view of the world, you know?
Absolutely.
How you see relationships, power, control. It's like a twisted cycle that keeps repeating.
And in Gacy's case, it's like he took that abuse
Yeah.
and just amplified it in this horrific way.
Exactly.
It's truly heartbreaking.
It is.
But his Wikipedia entry also says he was close to his mother. Did that have any effect, do you think?
That's an interesting point. Even in a family as dysfunctional as his, there can be these glimmers of positive connection.
Right.
But even that bond was overshadowed by something truly awful. Gacy was sexually abused by a family friend.
So we're already seeing these contradictions pop up. This longing for love and acceptance from his mom,
Yeah.
but also these incredibly traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
It's like he was trying to build a normal life
Right.
while being dragged down by this darkness.
That duality, that push and pull, it runs through his whole life. Even as he gets older, we see these conflicting forces playing out. He dropped out of high school, but then found success in business. He even became a respected member of the Jaycees.
The Jaycees?
Yeah, they're a civic organization focused on leadership and community involvement.
Huh. Ironic, considering what we know now.
It does make you think. It's almost like he was desperately trying to overcompensate for his inner turmoil.
Projecting this image of success and respectability.
Exactly. Trying to convince everyone, maybe even himself, that he was a good guy.
But as we'll see, that facade was paper thin.
Very thin.
And things take a dark turn when Gacy moves to Waterloo, Iowa.
Ah, yes, Waterloo. That's where his darker impulses really start to surface. He manages a few KFC restaurants, gets married, has kids. You know, the picture of a normal life.
The American dream, almost.
Right. But it's also where he commits his first documented crime.
The assault of Donald Voorhees, a 15-year-old boy.
A chilling turning point.
It really is. And it reveals so much about his psychology. The Wikipedia entry says that during his psych evaluation after the assault, Gacy showed zero remorse.
None.
He blamed everyone else for his actions.
Classic sign of sociopathy.
Really?
Yeah. That lack of accountability, that inability to empathize with his victim.
Wow.
Sociopaths see others as objects to be manipulated. They just don't have the capacity for guilt or remorse.
That's scary. And what's even more tragic is that his record was sealed because of some bureaucratic mess-up.
Oh, wow. So the system basically paved the way for more tragedies.
It's like they handed him a free pass.
It raises some tough questions, doesn't it?
It does.
How do we balance rehabilitation with protecting society from dangerous individuals? It's a complex issue.
Absolutely. And in Gacy's case, the consequences of that oversight were devastating.
Oh.
But the story doesn't end in Iowa. He ends up back in Chicago, remarries again, and starts his own construction company.
PDM contractors. And this is where his double life really takes off. He becomes this respected businessman, but he's also using PDM to prey on young men.
It's terrifying to think about. This seemingly ordinary guy using his company as a hunting ground.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll delve into the horrifying details of his crimes, the investigation, the trial. It's a dark chapter, but it's crucial to understanding the depths of his depravity.
And it's a reminder that we all need to be vigilant, aware of the potential dangers in our own communities.
Stay tuned because things are about to get even more intense.
Welcome back. Last time we left off with Gacy back in Chicago, right?
Yeah, seemingly putting his past behind him. Successful business, remarried, active in politics.
But it was all fake. Just a facade.
Exactly. And with PDM contractors, his dark side really took over.
He blended in, seemed normal, trustworthy.
All of which made him even more dangerous.
It's scary to think he was using his company to target young men.
And it worked. He'd offer them jobs, pay them for small tasks, or just invite them to hang out.
Used his position, his good reputation, to gain their trust.
Absolutely.
It's awful how he took advantage of them, exploited their need for work, for acceptance.
He was a master manipulator, knew how to find and use their weaknesses. And his political involvement, that photo with Rosalind Carter, it just made his image even stronger.
It's crazy how someone with his past could get that close to the First Lady. Did anyone suspect anything?
There were rumors, whispers, especially among people who knew him well.
But nobody believed them.
People wanted to believe the image, the successful businessman, the friendly neighbor. It's easier that way.
It just shows that evil can hide anywhere, disguised as normal.
Exactly. And it's a scary reminder of how we can be fooled, especially when we want to see the good in people.
Okay, let's talk about the murders. I know it's tough, but to understand Gacy, we got to face it.
Agreed. We need to talk about the facts, but we won't go into graphic details. We're here to understand, not to sensationalize.
Right, of course. So, his victims, what do we know? At least 33 young men and boys, right?
Yeah. Most were in their late teens, early 20s, many from working-class families, some runaways.
Gacy targeted those who were vulnerable.
Those who might not be missed right away, those who wouldn't cause too much suspicion.
It's heartbreaking to think of their lives cut short. All that potential.
And the way he lured them in, using promises of work or money, just shows how manipulative he was.
Twisted.
He knew how to exploit their hopes, their dreams.
And once they were at his house, what happened?
Based on his confession and the evidence, it was often the same. He'd offer them a drink, get them to relax, sometimes even do magic tricks.
He was a clown, right?
Yeah.
Performed at parties and events.
Yeah, a killer clown.
Yeah.
It's chilling to think about. This symbol of fun, of childhood, used as a mask for such darkness.
It's what makes it so disturbing, the clown and the killer. Using something that should bring joy and laughter to manipulate and terrify.
Absolutely.
So he'd gain their trust, and then what?
He'd often use handcuffs as part of his magic act, said it was just a trick. But the cuffs were real, and once they were restrained, the torture started.
The Wikipedia entry mentions a rope tourniquet. He called it the rope trick. So disturbing.
This wasn't random violence. There was a pattern, a ritual to it.
Right.
It points to a very deep psychological disturbance.
And he kept their bodies in the crawl space. How did he hide that for so long?
He was careful, methodical, chose victims who wouldn't be reported missing immediately, buried the bodies deep, used lime to hide the smell, and he kept up that appearance of being normal, the respectable businessman.
Amazing how he could separate those two parts of his life.
That compartmentalization is another sociopathic trait. It lets them function, seem normal, while doing horrible things.
But eventually it all fell apart, right?
Yeah.
What led to his arrest?
The disappearance of Robert Peast, a 15-year-old boy.
What happened?
He was last seen leaving the pharmacy where he worked. His mom reported him missing right away, and witnesses saw Gacy talking to him at the pharmacy.
So unlike the others, this time the police acted fast.
Yeah. They got a search warrant for Gacy's house, and what they found was horrifying.
The bodies in the crawl space. Must have been a shock.
It was the turning point. Before that, it was just suspicions, rumors. But this was undeniable proof, and it led to his confession. A rambling, incoherent attempt to justify what he did, to blame the victims.
But the evidence was clear, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. The physical evidence, the witness statements, even Gacy's own words contradicted him.
So what about the trial? Did he deny everything? Show any remorse?
Even with all the evidence, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity.
Insanity.
His lawyers argued he had multiple personalities, wasn't in control, but the prosecution said he was a cunning killer who knew exactly what he was doing.
So it was a battle of experts trying to figure out his mental state.
Exactly. And the jury believed the prosecution. They saw through Gacy's lies and found him guilty.
Wow. Must have been a huge media circus.
It captivated the nation, normal guy, horrific crimes, a trial that got into the darkest parts of the human mind.
And the verdict?
Guilty on 33 counts of murder, sentenced to death.
Wow.
At the time, it was the most murders anyone had ever been convicted of in the U.S.
It's hard to imagine what the families went through, knowing the man who took their loved ones was going to be executed.
Justice, but also deep sorrow. Nothing could bring back the victims or heal that pain.
Gacy's death ended his reign of terror, but the scars remain.
That's right. The impact of his crimes continues. For the families, the community, everyone.
And even with his death, there are still unanswered questions, mysteries that people are still trying to figure out.
Like, did he act alone?
He said he had help.
And there are times when the murders in his work schedule just don't add up.
The Wikipedia page mentions a few people who were investigated.
But nobody was ever charged.
So maybe others were involved?
Maybe they helped him. And maybe they got away with it.
That's a chilling thought.
It shows how complex this case is. The layers of deception. We may never know the full truth.
And it reminds us that we need to keep investigating, keep searching for the truth, even in cases that seem closed.
Absolutely.
We're back, and man, this Gacy case, it really gets under your skin.
Yeah. It's a tough one to shake off. It makes you question everything you think you know about good and evil.
Totally. Like, are monsters born or made?
Yeah.
And can you really spot them just by looking?
Gacy was like a chameleon. He blended right in, hid his darkness so well.
So let's talk about the end of his story, his execution.
Right.
He spent 14 years on death row.
Yep. May 10th, 1994, Stateville Correctional Center, Illinois.
I can only imagine what that day was like. Relief, for sure.
Definitely.
But also sadness, knowing that nothing could truly undo what he did.
Of course. Justice doesn't always equal healing.
And even though he's gone, there are still so many unanswered questions.
Like, did he really act alone?
He claimed he had accomplices, right?
He did. And when you look at the timing of some of the murders and his work schedule...
It's almost impossible.
Exactly. It just doesn't add up.
The Wikipedia page mentions a few names, people who were investigated.
But no charges were ever filed.
So it's possible, right, that others were involved.
It is. Maybe they helped him and maybe they got away with it.
That's a disturbing thought.
It's one of the things that keeps this case alive, I think. The idea that there's more to the story.
More secrets, more lies. It really shows how complex this whole thing is. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from John Wayne Gacy?
Well, on a practical level, I think it reinforces how important it is to be aware, to be vigilant.
Not just for ourselves, but for our kids, our communities.
Exactly. Trust your gut instincts. Pay attention to those red flags, no matter how small they seem.
And teach our kids to do the same, to set boundaries, to speak up if something feels wrong.
Absolutely.
But this case goes way beyond practical advice, right?
Oh, yeah.
It forces us to face some really unsettling truths about human nature.
It shatters that illusion that evil is always easy to spot, that monsters look like monsters.
Gacy was a master of disguise. He hid in plain sight. A successful businessman, active in this community, even a father figure to some.
And yet a brutal serial killer.
That duality, that contrast, is what makes this case so haunting.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about people. Makes you realize that even those who seem trustworthy can be capable of terrible things.
It's a reminder that the world can be a dark place, and that we need to stay vigilant, aware, and compassionate.
Compassion for the victims, their families, and even, in a way, for the perpetrator. Not to excuse their actions, of course, but to try to understand how someone could go down such a dark path.
It's a tough conversation to have, but it's an important one if we want to prevent this from happening again.
Exactly.
And that's maybe the most enduring legacy of John Wayne Gacy. A stark reminder of how fragile life is, how insidious evil can be, and how much we need awareness, empathy, and understanding.
Well said.
And to our listeners, I hope this deep dive has not only shed some light on this infamous case, but also made you think about the bigger questions it raises. About human nature, good and evil, and the importance of being vigilant and compassionate in our own lives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the light shining in the darkness.